Hey, Raindrops, it's True Crime Thursday. So that means Ebony K. Williams and I are back to give you another update of what's going on week 3 of the Diddy trial. Ebony, how are you?
Carlos King, darling, I'm fabulous and so excited to get into these latest updates. I mean, this is the case that keeps on giving, honey.
No, it really, really is. And speaking of giving, Cassie gave birth today.
Wow.
If you're watching this, it's True Crime Thursday. So she gave birth on Wednesday. Cassie gave birth on Wednesday to baby number 3. So congratulations to her and to her husband, Alex, with their growing family, which is so interesting because she just testified 2 weeks ago. So what do you make about all of that, Ebony?
Yeah, indeed, Carlos. It's very important, I think, for some of the raindrops and really just the broader viewing audience to understand when the prosecution is deciding the order, right, of where their witnesses will fall on the lineup, the order in which they will get on that witness stand and tell their version of the story. One of the things they consider, it's a lot of things they consider. And many people I see in the comments across the world are curious, Carlos, as to why Cassie testified so early. And of course, there were many people in the beginning saying, well, I'm not seeing RICO and she's not making the case for RICO. It's only domestic violence. And I know we'll get to all of that much later because, you know, some people are now saying RICO has possibly entered the chat. We'll get to that. But I want to be clear that Cassie testified essentially as the first primary witness for the prosecutors for 2 primary reasons. Number one, her state of just how pregnant she was, Carlos. Okay. And I'm speaking now from a lived experience lens. You know, I just gave birth myself about 10 months ago to baby Liberty. And when you and anybody who's given birth or been close up to that situation, they can tell you once you get to that 32 weeks, but certainly after that 35-week window, anything could happen at any time. And so those prosecutors, Carlos, knew just like we knew when Cassie was walking her big 8.5-month pregnancy up in that courtroom, glowing and stunning as she was, this is a very fragile witness. Okay. And they knew that they must have her testimony. She is in many ways regarded as the star witness, the prosecutor's star witness. And I'll get to that in my second prong as to why she's so important for the prosecutor's case, because she's foundational. Put a pin in that. But because she was very close to her 40-week due date, that was not a risk they could afford to take, Carlos King. They could not have her, as sometimes we call them, an encore witness, you know, kind of save the best for last, save the big splashy star witness as the last voice you hear going into that jury deliberation room. That is a tactic that lawyers do use, prosecutors and defense alike. But that was not on the table, so to speak here, Carlos, because this woman was entirely too close to giving birth. And could you imagine the shambles that that prosecution's case would be in had Cassie given birth early? Heaven forbid, we live in a world where we know Black and brown women and maternal health is not always successful. Black and brown women die 4, 5, 6 times as likely as white sisters do giving birth. So anything could happen. Complications for childbirth. She could have gone into a coma, heaven forbid, C-section, anything. You get the point. Not worth the risk. Put her on the stand early, get her testimony out of the way. We also saw she was on the stand for several days, Carlos. She wasn't on the stand for a couple of hours. She was on the stand for direct and cross for almost 3 days. So they did the right thing, putting her first on the primary list. The other reason is she was so foundational. So you've got to remember that there are going to be a lot of people on that witness stand that have a certain perception of Sean Combs, right? I'm sorry, in that jury, they have a certain perception of Sean Combs. And that is a 30+ year legacy built primarily around him being a business mogul and a cultural icon. And whether they think positively or negatively, that is their primary lens of this defendant. Cassie was paramount, Carlos, in destroying that as a primary image, as now creating and painting a broad stroke, very big, clear picture of what many are now calling a monster in Sean Combs, what many are now calling a deviant individual. And nobody, not Cassie's mama, not Kid Cudi, not, as we're now hearing from Capricorn Clark and other assistants and employees, nobody can paint that picture better than Cassie Ventura. So those are the two reasons, Carlos King, Cassie went kind of first, if you will, for big witnesses. Her very delicate and fragile state of being within weeks, as literally 2 weeks out of delivering a baby, and anything could happen to complicate her availability as a witness. And she is a primary foundational witness. She lays all of the evidentiary foundation for everything we've seen since her testimony. Her mother talking about the potential extortion, Kid Cudi talking about the potential arson, and now, of course, Capricorn Clark, which we'll get to today.
Yeah. No, so again, congratulations to Cassie, and everything that Ebony outlined now makes perfect sense as to why she was first, why she had to get out of the way. She literally testified 2 weeks ago, and like you said, not just for one day, for several days. And her testimony obviously was very crucial in this case. Speaking of which, so like you said as well, Capricorn Clark is the former assistant to Diddy, who has released a lot of information in her testimony about Kid Cudi, about Cassie. Can you explain to us what Capricorn Clark's testimony is about, why it's happening, and some of the bombshell stuff she has revealed?
Sure. So let me start. I like to start with the letter of the law, Carlos. So a lot of people that are saying I do or I don't see RICO. So let's go back to RICO. Let's go to RICO. And let's kind of name some elements. The elements to successfully prove RICO, which is racketeering, essentially, you need 5 elements, Carlos King. The very first, you need an enterprise. The very first thing, if you're going to get to RICO yesterday, today, or tomorrow, you've got to prove, the prosecution has to prove that a business enterprise is at play. So Capricorn is essential here because she's a what? An employee. So this is where people were kind of hyper-focusing, Carlos, on Cassie as a girlfriend in domestic violence, but she wasn't an employee, so to speak. She was an artist on the label, but she wasn't a part of the Sean Combs business enterprise in the way that an employee who operates under, you have a business, you know how this goes. Mm-hmm. So Capricorn, first and foremost, is important because she's one of the first big witnesses we're hearing from that was a official part of the enterprise, which is the very first element you must prove as the government for RICO. Number 2, you have to have a pattern of racketeering activity. Now I'll get to this. There's 35 different acts. Okay, we call them predicate acts, Carlos. They can include, catch this T, kidnapping. What's one of the primary things we heard Capricorn Clark testify to? That she was forced at gunpoint into the car to take the ride along to Kid Cudi's house. And she actually described it, Carlos King, as she felt kidnapped. Kidnapped. Okay, so this goes to one of the many 35 different qualifying predicate acts under a racketeering activity that will qualify for RICO. She also, again, she's talking about the arson, potentially, Kid Cudi too. That's another one of the many 35 activities that could be held account under RICO. There's also things like bribery. There's things like wiring. There's all types of things. The sex trafficking, 35, look them up, y'all. But kidnapping and arson are on the list, okay? And we're hearing Capricorn Clark testifying to both of those and then some. Relationship between the defendant and the enterprise. So she's talking about who's the boss of the enterprise, Carlos. Sean P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, Daddy Love Combs. Okay, that she was terrified, that he was calling the shots. He was always dictating to this one and that one, who's going to do what. Remember, we heard Capricorn Clark talking about a big, sizable man who was like double 2 linebackers from the NFL, intimidating her and making it clear that if she was lying about stealing some jewelry, which, one of the accusations she testified to was that she and others were accused of stealing millions of dollars of diamond and fine jewels from Sean Combs. And that this big NFL double-sized linebacker man said, hey, if you're stealing and you're lying, we're going to throw you in the East River. Okay, so that's talking about Sean Combs. At the direction of Sean Combs, this big burly man said this to her and threatened her life. She also talked about the head of Sean Combs' security, a different individual. making her take a lie detector test in a hotel room, I believe, over the course of 5 days, and saying these results ain't looking right. You better calm down, take some deep breaths, because if you're lying and it's looking funny, we're gonna throw you in the East River. We're gonna kill you. So that again, it's talking about
what were these lie detector questions the same questions over the course of 5 consecutive days?
Well, I don't know that we know
trip her up?
exactly what they were, but I think they certainly were just like we saw with the exonerated 5. I see your point, Carlos. It's a good one.
Yeah.
The sheer exhaustion of having somebody have to subject themselves to that type of scrutiny for 5 days does some things to the nervous system, can compel people to give false admissions. So yes, the point is, though, to this element of the defendant's control over the enterprise, this linebacker man, this head of security, head of whose security? Sean Combs' security. So that's satisfying potentially the third element of RICO, and there's only 5. So relationship between the defendant established. Then we have conduct or participation. This is where the defendant is being proven to have participated in some of these things I've named. So in Capricorn Clark, again, on the witness stand, Carlos talks about it was Sean Combs who came to get her, who put her in the car, who made her participate, go to Kid Cudi's house, made her call Kid Cudi and say, I'm outside, Puff's inside. Who's participating? Sean Combs. She's connecting the dots of not just his domain. That's the third element. He's controlling it, but he's also participating in it. See? And then the fifth and final element is interstate commerce. For me, this is the one I think we're still waiting on the big witnesses to really prove, because interstate commerce means across state lines, that these business transactions, that these activities were participating and happening across state lines. And right now, I know we've heard from one sex trafficker. I hope we don't hear from too many more, child, because I really don't like these sex worker testimonies too much, unless they're going to prove some of these points very specifically. But we heard from, I want to say, was it the plumber? What was his name? The enforcer? The one we heard from last week? Yes.
Yes, that his stage name. Yes.
The stage name, yes. That gentleman was from inside of New York. So, and he testified to participating in prostitution, which is the illegal sex work for money. So that is prostitution, but it's not interstate. It wasn't prostitution across state lines, which is the legal requirement, Carlos, for that element. So I could, for those that are counting the elements and say, hey, I'm trying to see RICO. I just walked you through RICO 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I think the last one that I personally am still kind of waiting to see if they can totally button it up from the government side is the interstate piece. So, they could make the case that they've made it, but I'd like to see more evidence around the crossing of the state lines and the back and forth from Florida to New York to LA and more of that.
And just so I'm clear as well, the sort of crossing from state lines is an exchange for sexual acts with the intent of paying for these, right? So for example, so for example, let's say Puff lived in Los Angeles. If he paid somebody to go from New York City to Los Angeles in exchange for money to perform a sexual act, that is a part of
those are the elements you just proved. Your hypothetical is it somebody being transported across state lines for the purposes of paid sex. That's it.
Paid sex. Okay. Paid sex. Got it. Okay. So we're now getting into what people have been asking for the past 3 weeks in this trial is we are finally getting into the racketeering / RICO charges of it all. Everybody just broke it down. And Capricorn Clark's testimony, who is the former assistant, she did talk about, she claimed that Sean Combs showed up at her door with a weapon after finding out about Cassie and Kid Cudi's relationship and allegedly threatened to kill him.
And
thoughts on that, Ebony?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is the kidnapping, showing up at if the jurors believe what Capricorn Clark is saying, then they're hearing testimony of kidnapping by the hands of Sean Combs, personally, by the way, him saying, get in the car at gunpoint, per her testimony, as you said, and then her saying, I didn't feel free to leave, which is one of the thresholds of kidnapping. So that's very powerful. That's very damning, Carlos, because that goes to the list of the 35 different things. And for those that are curious, it's also robbery, arson, bribery, dealing in obscene matter. I mean, so that could even possibly be some of the things they found in the raids, some of the pornography and things of this nature, right? Sex trafficking, we talked about, human trafficking, involuntary servitude. Also, it could be embezzlement, could be money laundering, could be obstructing of justice. That's a very broad one. So a lot of these facts fall into that one. Mail fraud, securities fraud, wire fraud. That's where the bookkeeping and what they testify to is going to matter a lot. Gambling, and there's just a bunch of things, theft, terrorism, bunch of stuff, 35. So when she talks about being held up at gunpoint, forced into a car with Sean Combs and taken on the ride to Kid Cudi's house to then be the one to get Cudi on the phone and threaten him and basically say, Sean Combs is inside your house. So, you know, be on the swivel basically. And I'm sitting outside the house. Very damning testimony. I also want to point out when Capricorn Clark, Carlos, talks about being thrown into the East River by these big, large enforcer type of men, but head of security and this secondary man. And I want to be clear here, Carlos. I don't think that any entity to prove RICO, that it needs to look like Goodfellas and The Godfather. But I think people think that, right? Yes. I think people think if we're talking RICO, they think Rudy Giuliani, they think mafia, they think organized crime in that context, right? And anything that doesn't look like that, people struggle with seeing it. Okay. But what I'm laying out to you per the elements is that it doesn't need to look like that. But let's go with those that are predisposed to that optic. Well, I don't know. When you're telling me a big 300, 400-pound dude is threatening to throw me in the East River, is that not giving Goodfellas? Is that not giving Joe Pesci? Is that not giving Enforcer? I mean, I kind of want people to start seeing this is more than just threesomes and sexual proclivities. This is allegedly a business boss man, you know, Sean Combs, hiring and paying employees and subordinates in a commercial capacity on payroll, literally, to do the enforcing of his will, many of which qualify as illegal activity, from the kidnapping to the arson, potentially, again, the make Kid Cudi's car blow up and explode. Also, remember, Capricorn Clark testified to something she did. Combs didn't like it, and he said, I should kill both you bitches, I think referring to her and Cassie, and I should cut her face, referring to Cassie. Again, this is not violent, because remember, one of the big things going into the case, Carlos, where a lot of people were saying that people that participated in this kind of world of Sean Combs did so on a voluntary basis. That's going to be one of the main defenses. When the defense, you know, kind of has the floor, which will be coming up in a few weeks, and they start calling their witnesses, you better believe, Carlos King, one of the main things they're going to argue is going to be that no matter how horrible and toxic this world you've been hearing about of Sean Combs sounds like, everybody that participated was an adult consenting on a volunteer basis. We're going to hear that from the defense. But when you juxtapose that with what Capricorn Clark is saying, I'm going to throw you in the East River and kill you and maybe cut your girl's face open, or that doesn't sound like volunteerism. That doesn't sound like somebody consenting as much as it sounds like fear, coercion, and force.
Yeah, because I also want to get into what you're saying about the enterprise being exposed in terms of everything that Capricorn Clark had to endure, which is why, to me, and you tell me if I'm wrong, as of today, it does appear that Capricorn Clark's testimony, basing off of establishing the enterprise, is very important, because she's giving us details about what it was like being a paid employee at Combs Enterprises and all the things that has allegedly happened. I'm going to talk about a few things that she mentioned, Ebony, and explain to us the sort of importance of why this is even being discussed. And I'll just give you guys some clip notes. She talked about, well, Clark testified that she was setting up hotel rooms, which which Puff Combs typically stayed in with Kim Porter once a week. She said that part of her job was to set up hotel rooms with supplies, including a camera, bottles of baby oil, lube, and drugs such as ecstasy. And that she also testified that she would book weekly hotel rooms for himself and Cassie, where they would use IV drips for several days to help them recover from drug abuse. Okay. Mm-hmm. Last but not least, well, there's so many months she shared, but I want to make sure we get to the points in terms of what Ebony is saying about setting up the enterprises. She said that after, which Ebony explained, these sort of forcible verbal insults and force that Puff did, she did quit. Mm-hmm. She said on stand that she came back to work for Cassie. She was responsible for managing Cassie's image and career. She said that Cassie was no Whitney Houston or Mariah Carey, but she had something she could work with. It was her who decided to purchase a burner phone once she learned Cassie was dating Kid Cudi. Capricorn stated today that when she told Cassie to move on from Diddy, she did say, well, Jay-Z is dating somebody else. Who am I supposed to be with? I wanted to bring those up because what we talked about last week was people saying about Dawn Richard. Well, why did you come back and ask for money and a recording deal and for the band to get back together if he allegedly did all these things to you? Capricorn Clark acknowledged she did quit, but that she came back. She said for Cassie. And then obviously we're now hearing that she was sort of telling Cassie to leave the relationship. Cassie said Jay-Z is dating somebody else, which we now know he's married to Beyonce. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about the psychological aspect of that, coming back to a place where you were threatened and physically pushed. Sure. And then Cassie at the time saying in the mind she has, if I'm not dating Diddy anymore, is my only resource dating another hip hop mogul?
Yeah, so two very high level, intense psychological stakes at play with both of them. I want to distinguish them for a second. I want to put Cassie on the shelf for a second. Let's talk about Capricorn, because to me, she's a simpler one to digest because we're talking about employer-employee relationship. And you know how small this business is that we're in, right? If we want to talk about being in the entertainment business, and they're in an even smaller niche of it being in the music aspect of the entertainment business, right? And I think that Capricorn Clark's testimony kind of lends itself to why she might be inclined to go back to a abusive, horrific situation, because one of the things that she testified to on the stand, Carlos, in terms of the abusive nature of Sean Combs towards her, was he also threatened to kill her when he found out that she used to work for who? Suge Knight. And then there was this horrible scene she describes allegedly in Central Park, where he's again threatening to harm her in the heat of the night in Central Park here in New York. That is, again, for those that want the mafia style intimidation tactics to see RICO, I would say, here you go. I would say, let me see how you feel being in the middle of dark ass Central Park with a very wealthy, powerful individual that is known to have weapons, guns, and arms, which you have seen with your own two eyes. And he's saying, in the backdrop of the Biggie, Pac, death row, bad boy of it all, we know people have died, people have been killed. Like, this is not hypothetical. How would you feel? Would you feel free to leave? Would you feel free to put in your 2 weeks notice? I mean, let's be serious, folks. Let's tell the truth. you're
Yes.
Capricorn Clark, Carlos, and you've already worked for Suge Knight, and whatever happened there happened, so you moved on from that. Now you're with Puff. He's threatening your life on day one working for Bad Boy. Like she said, other than Jay-Z, which is what Cassie said, how many kingpins, if you will, how many titans of industry can you bounce from and to before you get a reputation of not being workable in the industry? You know, so I think it becomes more reasonable that even though she describes a horror situation for herself, if you want to work in music, you want to work in hip hop, you want to work at it at the highest level, there are only but so many places you can go. I'm not saying that's the choice everybody would make. I'm not saying it's even the right choice, but I'm saying you can argue it becomes an understandable choice to some degree.
Got it. Okay. I also want to get into the fact that recently Diddy's legal team tried to ask the judge for a mistrial. Mm-hmm. What information do you have, Ebony, as to why they're doing this during week 3 of this trial?
So 2 reasons. I'm not surprised, first of all. So this is not out of the ordinary, Carlos. It is actually the defense's job to throw everything against the wall, so to speak, and see what sticks. So as often, just like we saw them ask for him to be released on bond 4 times and bail 4 times, it was denied all the times, but they must ask. So just like they did that, they must, at every reasonable opportunity, or sometimes even what we consider an unreasonable opportunity, go ahead and ask for that mistrial. It does 2 things, Carlos. It flags for the jurors, because even though ultimately we know this mistrial request was denied, which I'll get to, the jurors are still watching this play out, right? So they're still watching defense counsel say, Your Honor, basically we're calling a flag on the play. From our perspective, where the prosecution is going is what they call prejudicial, meaning they are suggesting things in their questioning that is so harmful to the perception of our defendant, of our client, that it will prejudice the jury against him. It will bias them against him. They are suggesting something so horrific about him. In this case, they were talking about the fact that the arson detective was on the witness stand, and the prosecution was asking him if in the investigation of the Kid Cudi car explosion, if fingerprints were taken from the scene. And essentially the arson detective says that they were, but that ultimately that fingerprint evidence was destroyed. And then the prosecution asked, and they know they're not going to get a real answer, but like, at whose request? Who gave the command to destroy the fingerprint evidence, which we know would have been so valuable for solving the crime? And of course, there was no answer, but the implication, the defense argues, has already been made. And especially when you have one juror that said that they did believe during voir dire, we heard jurors saying that they believed it was possible for Sean Combs to buy his way out of criminal activity, to buy his way out of the justice system. So this kind of goes to that pre-existing prejudice, is the defense's argument, Carlos. Now, the judge says no dice, denying the motion for mistrial. While I do believe the prosecution was prejudicial in that line of questioning, I'm going to give a jury instruction before, they go into deliberation that says, basically, don't put any weight on that. I'm instructing you as the judge of this case not to imply or give any credence to that implication that the fingerprint evidence was destroyed at the request of Sean Combs. And while that instruction is appreciated, the defense, Carlos, is kind of noting it in the record every time they make one of those motions for mistrial. And this can also be used if Sean Combs is found guilty of any or all of these crimes. We know that there's going to be an appeal process, right? They're going to absolutely appeal any convictions that come of this case. And those things can be helpful on appeal, where they can go back in the record and say, see here, we said this was prejudicial. See here, we said this would be a problem. And those are kind of flagging issues that could be ripe for appeal. So they're doing 2 things.
Do you think that Diddy should testify and take the stand?
No, I don't. And let me tell you why. And I don't always say that. Now, there are going to be a lot of lawyers, Carlos, they kind of default to a general rule of defendants never taking the stand. And let me explain why that is, by the way. That can be wise legal counsel in the sense that the defense has to prove nothing in any case, ever. The defense has zero burden of proof. Zero. They can literally say, they can call zero witnesses. They could put forth zero pieces of evidence. They can stand up and say, Your Honor, the prosecution has failed to meet their burden of proof, which is proving beyond a reasonable doubt with their witnesses and their evidence that my client did what they said they did, and we rest the case, and my client is not guilty. And they can win. I've seen it. So it is true that the defense has no burden here. And if you have no burden, many times you only do yourself harm by putting up a defendant as a witness and inviting questioning and inviting scrutiny that otherwise the jury would never know, the judge would never know, and you could be creating problems for yourself unnecessarily. See my point? But I don't think that's always the case. I think sometimes, especially like in self-defense cases, it's very important for the jurors to hear straight from the defendant's own mouth their psyche, their thought process, why they did what they did, things of this nature. I'll give you a good example of where they're definitely probably going to need to call the witness. This young man, this black man, I think his name is, oh gosh, the young black man who's accused of killing the white boy for the teasing on the schoolyard recently. But ultimately, the young black boy is arguing self-defense, that the white boy was taunting him.
I know the case you talk about, yes.
Yeah, so in that case, I would advise that young man to get on that witness stand, and they're going to need to walk the jurors through his psychology. I felt intimidated. I felt threatened. I felt there was nothing else to do but to use the knife I think he had on him and defend myself. The jury must hear that from him in that kind of case. I don't think that applies here, Carlos. I think Sean Combs, the allegations against him, I think we saw a preview of what he would look like on the stand when we saw that horrific Instagram apology video after the Cassie tape was released. And I don't think anybody thought that did Sean Combs any favors. I don't think anybody felt, oh, well, now I understand. I don't think anybody felt that moved by it. You know, I think it serves to do nothing but more than affirm some of the most egregious, horrific things we have heard about him throughout this trial. And so I don't think he helps himself explaining. There's also kind of a saying in our business of the law, when you're explaining, you're losing, you know. So I think putting Sean Combs on the stand to explain, this is my lifestyle preferences. I enjoy these types of sex acts. I enjoy escorts. I enjoy beating on women. Or even that was the worst day of my life, and the video you saw was a version of me, but it's not the best of me. Like, I don't want to hear that shit if I'm a juror, you know, even if that can go to the arguments that the defense will be making in closing arguments, Carlos. They're going to have to argue that, though. They're going to have to say, what you saw on that tape was horrible. My client was horrible in that. But that is not meeting the element of the prosecution's broader burden of proof as it relates to racketeering, because they're going to have to make the argument. But do we need Sean Combs to sit on the stand and acknowledge what we kind of already know about your propensity for violence, your propensity for threatening people, your propensity for intimidating, coercing, extorting? I think it serves zero purpose putting him on the witness stand.
Two more questions before I let you go, Ebony. Based on you establishing this enterprise that the prosecution has to prove racketeering existed in these counts, do you think some of Diddy's celebrity friends, former label mates from whether it's Mary J. Blige, Little Kim, members of these other Faith Evans, members of these other group, would they testify on behalf of the prosecution, or would these people actually testify for the defense in establishing his character? Because to your point, O.J. Simpson was found not guilty, and he did not take the stand because, to your point, Ebony, we knew that Nicole Brown Simpson, may she rest in peace, was abused.
Yes.
So to get a man on the witness stand explaining his rationale for hitting a woman, to your point, I don't want to hear it. And OJ was never on the stand. So I do agree with you about the possibility of the reasons why we probably won't see Puff on the stand. But we will see some of these celebrities that haven't said anything about this case, but were very close to him.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. Listen, they need to put some defense character witnesses on this stand. You damn right. Now, how successful they're going to be in finding people, because some people would say the silence has been a bit deafening when it relates to Sean Combs and those that we know did business with him closely, right? Because there have been other cases not like this per se, but other cases where high profile people were accused of horrible things, and immediately there's a chorus of individuals saying that was not my experience of them. I knew them different. I mean, some people said that about Bill Cosby, right? We saw Felicia Rashad come out and say that was not her experience of Bill Cosby. We heard, I don't want to put names in people's mouth, but I think Keisha Knight Pulliam, but Felicia Rashad stands out. She said, and stands 10 toes down to this day, that was not the Bill Cosby she knew. She had a beautiful professional relationship with the man, and that's her story, and she's sticking to it immediately, right? That's just for example. We've not really heard anybody, to my recollection, do that on behalf of Sean Combs at this point. Now, to your point, Carlos, will they march out a parade of individuals that can speak to good business dealings with Sean Combs, good personal relationships with Sean Combs, maybe some ex-girlfriends we don't know about? Maybe. I think it would certainly be helpful to kind of help balance, if you want to use that word, the scales of perception as it relates to him. It's one thing if you're Mr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's something else if it's all just the most horrific version. Because at least if they can do that, Carlos, let's just say they're able to find a handful, it helps the jury go to that deliberation room and consider a broader picture, consider the possibility of something else at play. But when it's all horrible, threatening, demeaning, violent, guns, drugs, it's too compounding. And then you put the jury in a position to have no other real option to weigh, even if they want to consider another version of this individual, or they want to consider the prosecution not quite meeting their burden because it's so compounded. I do want to say, for the raindrops, for the record, even though I don't expect to hear from Sean Combs on this witness stand, I would not recommend he testify if I was at his defense table. But the decision whether or not for a defendant to testify in their own defense is only up to the defendant, Carlos. And this is important because, yes, this is big, and they hammered this on the bar exam and in law school, criminal law 101 first year. Defense counsel can tell you, hell no, you'll destroy the case, you'll go to jail for the rest of your life for sure. But it is ultimately your decision as the defendant, and it is the defendant only. So despite what his defense team of $20 million lawyers tell him, there is a possibility that Sean Combs, in his own capacity, says, I don't give a damn what y'all talking about. I know my charisma. I know my star power. I know my compelling nature as a superstar storyteller, and I'm going to get on that stand and I'm going to convince them otherwise. That is possible. That happens. I think, again, it would be horrific legal advice, but I do want the raindrops to know that that is an option for Sean Combs, as it is an option, Carlos, for every defendant in the United States of America.
Last question, Ebony K. Williams. President Trump recently pardoned Todd Chrisley and his wife from the reality show The Chrisleys, who were found guilty for tax evasion. They're now pardoned and being set to free to roam the streets in a few days. Do you think President Trump, if Puffy is found guilty, is there a possibility of President Trump pardoning Diddy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And here are a few reasons I think it's more possible than some people are acknowledging. Number one, we know for sure that they have a pre-existing relationship. We know that. We've seen photos. I wouldn't be surprised if Puff was at Donald Trump's wedding to Melania. You know, like, we know they were at white parties together. We know that they partied. They're also both sons of New York City. Like, so there is a kind of cultural sphere in which they actually share occupancy, and they overlap in the timeline of that occupancy. Although Trump is much older, he kind of hit the peak of his pop cultural status at the same time as Sean Combs was up and coming. So these two are very familiar with each other. I'm not saying they're best friends, but they're very familiar with each other, and they operate and they respect the same kind of value system, which is power. Okay. I also think we know historically Trump has, and we see this right now on the political far right, they're taking on the mantle of free Tory Lanez. And a lot of people are kind of wondering, like, where is this coming from? Why is this white Republican congresswoman talking about free Tory Lanez? Why are some of these far right podcaster bros talking about free Tory Lanez? Well, it's a psychology, Carlos, that the far right has taken up and said that there's this class, if you will, this category, this sector of American men and boys, white, black, Hispanic, and otherwise, that feel America is too kind of woman friendly. It's too kind of on this equality shit. And they want to roll that back. And a part of that rollback is to empower men who represent at least the kind of brutality, disrespect, and subordination towards women. And Tory Lanez represents that. And certainly in light of this case, Sean Combs represents that. So I think on those two bases, and the fact that we also know Trump has a history of pardoning some black hip hop stars. He gave a pardon to Lil Wayne. I know he gave a pardon to Kodak Black, and so on and so forth. So there is some consistency that would be there if Sean Combs was pardoned by Donald Trump. And again, I think there is some familiarity between them as individuals.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, like tons of videos of them together. Yeah. We saw Trump in hip hop music videos, the intersection between politics, like you said, so eloquently and beautifully, being the sons of New York City. And we all know what that means when you are a man running New York City, whether it's in real estate or in entertainment. So I actually agree with you that I think it's a huge possibility may happen, especially because he did pardon Lil Wayne and he did pardon Kodak Black. And obviously Diddy is a huge mainstay. And at the end of the day, politics is all about optics. Not all of it, some of it, large part of it. Large part of it. So for Trump to pardon a black hip hop mogul with all the black men who are, on his side, and we have seen that, could make Trump appear to be a president for that demographic. So
that particular sector of black men, and pay attention to this Tory Lanez shit too, because it's kind of flying under the radar. But if you do a quick search, you'll see there is this whole contingency of far right Republicans that are on this. And part of it is because, and the reason they can't do anything for Tory is because he was convicted in state court in California, right? And so they're using the bully pulpit of the microphone to draw attention to it. But Trump, because Puff's charges are federal, this is simply the stroke of a pen and it all goes away. So fascinating, a lot to watch, a lot to talk about, Carlos. I love doing this with you every week. This is great.
Now, listen, the highlight of my week. So MBK Williams, thank you so much for another episode, True Crime Thursday. And I'll see you back next Thursday.
Bye, love.
Bye, baby.
Love you. This was great.